In this video, I'm going to answer some questions you have about primers. So I was asked some questions about primers that I'm going to answer in this video. Let me go to that page where I have the questions at. Okay, from Dwayne. It says, thanks for video lessons. What about sanding primers? I've watched a few channels and have mixed reviews on when and what to sand. I have plans as soon as Canada comes and gets its drunk weather here in Louisiana, working on my C10. I have different areas of bodywork and patchwork that needs to be completed and not sure which type of primer to use. Okay, so there are different types of primers. What I would recommend, anywhere that has metal, you want to put something for corrosion protection, and I'm going to recommend epoxy. There's a couple you can use, but to keep from confusing you, it sounds like this is kind of a restoration project, that I would use epoxy primer. Epoxy is very compatible with other products, and you can put most products on top of that, so it's very user friendly. So I would recommend putting epoxy down on the bare metal for corrosion protection. Now, epoxy is not really a fill primer. You know, its only purpose is for corrosion protection and adhesion. Anywhere you have body work, where you have done a body filler or patch panels or any of the stuff that you're talking about, I would come back and put primer surfacer, like a 2K primer that fills those scratches and imperfections. And that's what you would sand. A primer surfacer basically is like a filler. You put it on there and sand it out, and if there's any scratches or small imperfections, you know, that primer will fill those scratches and you sand it smooth. So that's what I would recommend, is to put epoxy on any bare metal and put a 2K primer surfacer. You know, it's also known as fill primer, primer filler. Just a 2K primer on the areas that have body work. Now keep in mind, you know, epoxy has a window. The one I use is 3 days, so you can put another, you know, your 2K primer on top of that within 3 days and still have your chemical bond. But after that 3 days, it loses its chemical adhesion, so you will have to provide mechanical adhesion. So if you put that on there and you know, a long time later you're going to come back and paint it, and you epoxied all the metal, but maybe you just put primer surfacer on the areas that you needed it, you will need to scuff that before painting it. Okay, let's go down to the next question. And if that didn't answer your question, be sure and come back and ask, and I'll try to better answer that. Let's see. Okay, final coat of feather fill needs to be primed. This is by John Wilson. Final coat of feather fill needs to be sanded before 2K primer. What grit should I start and end with? Okay, so you've primed with feather fill, and you know, that's just like a real thick primer. You know, I would block it out with, if you're going to be putting primer surfacer or 2K primer on it, I would use 220 grit. I wouldn't go any finer than that, because your primer surfacer, your 2K primer is going to fill those 220 grit scratches just fine. So I would sand it down with 220 grit, put your 2K primer on, block that down with 320, and then once it's blocked out, looks good, you know, using your guide coat, making sure there's no scratches left, then I would final sand it with some 500 grit and then be ready for paint. And when I say paint, I usually recommend using a primer sealer, just to get a uniform color before you start painting. Let's see, what is the name of the tool you use to pop the fender? And this is where I've got a fender that's caved in, and I reach this hook in and pop it out. The most common name for that is Morgan Knocker. There's other brands out there, but if you go to Amazon or somewhere and type that in, you will get a selection of them. But I believe Morgan Knocker is the brand that I'm using, and probably the most common. They're not the cheapest, but they're a good tool. And it's just a big slide hammer is what it is. You know, it works good. You know, it's a must for any type of work that you're doing in an auto body. There's a lot of times, if you have the tool, you'll realize, you know, I need this. So I would really recommend getting one of those. I'll try to put a link down in the description so that you can see what I'm talking about. But it's called the Morgan Knocker. Okay, I'm going to answer another one. Let's see. Okay, here's one from Melissa. Dumb question, LOL. But do I have to disconnect the battery before I do this? And it's talking about replacing a headlight. And anytime you're doing any electrical work, it's a good idea to go ahead and disconnect the negative battery cable. It only takes a couple of minutes. And be sure that you tape it off, or, you know, put a baggie around or something so that if it moves, it doesn't arc. And it's always a good idea to disconnect the negative battery cable. Ben Cribb. Hi, my name is Michael from New Zealand. I have a question about 2K. Ratio is 4 to 1, 25% reducer to mix with the paint will make it runny on the roof of the car. I'm okay with the spray gun, less reducer. What do you think? Okay, a lot of these products, you know, they'll give you like 4 to 1, the mixing ratio 4 to 1, and it's an option to mix it up to 25%. So what that means is you go ahead and mix it, and then whatever volume you have at that time, you can reduce it up to 25%. And I know, like with epoxy and some primers, you know, are like that. And what the 25% is going to do, it's just going to thin it out where it sprays a little smoother. For example, epoxy, if you're spraying epoxy and you're going to be putting 2K primer over it, there's no need to reduce it because you're going to be sanding that. But if you're spraying epoxy and you're using it as basically as a sealer, primer sealer, and you're going to paint right on top of that, put your base coat, I would recommend going ahead and reducing it, you know, the recommended amount, because that would just allow it to flow out a little smoother, and then that won't give you the orange peel that maybe you would have without adding the reducer. So it kind of depends on the application on that. Next question comes from John Lewis. How long does after painting should you wait to wet sand? And I'm assuming you're talking about getting buffing and polishing. Well, I usually do it the next day. I'll let it dry overnight, then the next day, I mean, there's a window. You can do it anytime, but if you wait too long, it's a little bit harder because that paint gets harder. It's best to do it, you know, the next day is to buff and polish that. It'll usually say in your technical data sheet, you know, the recommended time, and that's what I would follow. You know, I'd get the go to wherever you buy the paint at and ask for the technical data sheet for that clear coat or whatever it is that you're painting, and it will give you the recommendations. But I usually do it the next day, and that works pretty well for me. All right, well, I hope this helped answer your question, and that wraps it up for this video. I do appreciate you for watching. Be sure if you subscribe if you haven't done so. Like this video. Thanks for watching. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.